Welcome to Gut Check Radio. I'm Nick Belden, a chiropractic physician and functional medicine practitioner. The information provided in this podcast is for educational entertainment purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, cure, or treat any disease, and do not apply any of the information you hear without first speaking with your physician. In the mold community, there's such an emphasis on avoidance, and you can never come near it, or else the mycotoxins, I don't even like that word, are going to completely obliterate you. And what I started, as I started working with people who would go through that journey, I started just thinking in my own head, like, to me, we were made to be resilient, and avoidance never really made sense. But I would, like you said, the science was pointing to avoidance. So I was like, I guess that's what you do. So at what point did you start to realize, like, it's not about avoidance, but it's about resiliency?
Sure. Well, I think the brain retraining that I did, I learned a lot about limbic system resistance. And so I learned about these, and through the brain, learning about these like well-worn toboggan runs that we have in our brains for the things that we use the most. It's a pathway of least resistance. And if you think about it in terms of humans in general, we do a lot of avoiding. We avoid suffering, we avoid conflict, we avoid a lot. And we do that, it actually becomes just a pattern in our behavior. So the more that I saw and understood that, I was like, my breakthrough in this journey comes from facing what I'm resisting, facing where the block is, where the wall is. And obviously with me and my faith in God and Jesus and my relationship with him, that was like, okay, his love. I understood through the understanding of the science of neuroplasticity that I was like, all these neurochemistry or chemicals that are coming up, the dose chemistry, like the good stuff that comes from love, and all this other stuff comes from fear. And I was like, I see this as a fear block, that even if I don't necessarily think I feel fear, that whatever I am resisting, there's something good on the other side of that God has for me. And I need to face it and I need to walk through it. And if I avoid it, I'm just going to be kind of circling around, and I'm not going to move through this, and I'm not going to move up and through. So I started to see overall the human behavior element of all of us, and the tendency to go the pathway of least resistance for all of us, and realizing that I have to change my brain. In order to change my brain, I have to build new pathways. In order to build new pathways, I need to actually do things that I am not used to doing, and I'm not comfortable even with doing. And through that, those neural connections are going to get strengthened. And then my brain is this control center for optimal health. And as I do that, I build a new brain, and I don't use the old pathways that are the ones that have been well worn, especially avoidance type ones. They die. Like that's just the reality of how our brains are made. And as I saw that helped me to be like, oh, I see this in a whole new light. I got to observe myself curiously. I got to watch how I'm behaving, not from fear, but from that curious place of like why I'm doing what I'm doing, and recognize the motivation behind it. Does that help?
It does. No, oh my goodness. Yeah. And, for the listeners who aren't familiar with like limbic retraining, the limbic system, give us like the brief overview, and then what finally led you to stumble on the brain retraining? Like, who introduced you, how, in what situation?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So first of all, the limbic system, a lot of people don't even know what the limbic system is, right? Yeah. So the limbic system is this part of your brain that is in your, is it your temporal lobe? And we call it a lot of times your primitive brain. It can also be called your emotional chemical brain. So anytime any of us, regardless whether you're healthy or not healthy, every emotion that you have is a chemical secreted through your limbic system. And that limbic system is this alert system for you that mostly deals a lot to do with protective, alerting problems. That's where your fear centers are, your amygdala. You've got a short-term memory, your hippocampus. You've got your hypothalamus. That's your that's connected to your HPA axis, and it's that thermostat in the body. And then you've got a few other things like your cingulate gyrus, which is there putting that gate up, yes or no, do we have an invader coming into our body or not? And so that understanding that sits on your autonomic nervous system, which is our automatic nervous system, which just causes the things to happen in our body automatically, breathe, and our heart rate and everything, and seeing the connection with the signaling that is coming from my limbic system is directly creating functionality or dysfunctionality in my automatic nervous system. And so there's that part of your brain, but we have something called our prefrontal cortex that goes on top. that helps us to make those higher decisions so that we don't just live out of this emotional chemical brain and just do whatever a 3-year-old would do in a situation and have a temper tantrum. We go, hold on a second, and we're able to reason and deduce. But when you get into chronic fight or flight, when your brain starts to really go through a lot of these inflammatory processes, that part of your brain, it actually starts to shrink. And you don't function so well in your prefrontal cortex. So that's when your limbic system really starts driving the bus. And it's making a lot of the decisions for you, and you don't want to make those decisions, but it's actually doing it for you. You almost feel like you're in bondage to whatever is coming up. Like somebody with anxiety, they don't want to fear something, they don't want to feel a certain way, but their body is exuding this sensation, these feelings and these emotions, and they feel out of control and powerless to it. So that limbic system needs to know that you're safe and needs to know that you are okay. And we need to tell it that and signal it that, because it's now just operating based upon old information from the past, and it's constantly living in these loops, these trauma loops, and signaling that. So we need to re-signal the right things to let your brain, your body, all of you know that you're fine, you're going to be okay, and that you're going to come out of this, regardless of whether or not you actually have a real diagnosis or not, that you can come out of it. So someone with COVID gets COVID, that's a real thing. But we don't have to sit in long COVID. We can actually train the brain to come out of that so that your body can actually come and get into rest and digest and heal. And that's a lot of what you're doing in limbic system retraining.
Yeah. And like you said, ironically, for a lot of people, the avoidant behavior that they think they need is actually amplifying the neural circuitry of the limbic system.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Especially when emotions are involved, because emotions strengthen neural connections. So as soon as you have fear or guilt or shame or all the negative things that are in there, and there's strong emotions associated with it, it actually strengthens those pathways. And so we have these, like I said, these well-worn toboggan runs, or maybe they're not quite there yet, but the more that we avoid, or the more that we operate in these pathways that are not helpful to recovery, that it just makes it like grows deeper, and then it becomes easier to default into that automatically. And we need to signal out of this. And yeah, it's amazing the principles of neuroplasticity that can get us through some of the injuries that come about in our lives, whether it's virus, whether it's car accident, whatever it is that that can get us, kind of push us into this state and start to create this cycle. We can use the same principles to get us out of that and back into rest and digest, and signal back to our bodies and our brains that all is well, all will be well, and then our body can actually do what it needs to do, which is to come back into that harmony and that state where your gut flora can come back into like that symphony, like all these wonderful things that our bodies want to do, know how to do, but that we have this broken messaging system that's going on that's keeping you stuck in that state of, oh no, bad things, survival mode.